Alrighty, here we are inside of Kontakt. So really quickly, let's talk about how to add this library, get it set up, and check out a couple of the patches here. Now, very similar to any other library. If you're unfamiliar with this, it's really easy. You just click the Add Library button. So you navigate to wherever it is, and if you've installed it right, you click OK, and it will show up right here. Maybe go through an activation, through the Service Center, enter in your code, no big deal. Then you'll have access to the library right here. This library has two main sections here. We have the solo instruments along with these sections, and then we have multis. And we'll get into the multis more a little bit later. Right now, we're going to check out the solo stuff and just go over a little bit of the articulations and different patches in here. They have a couple of different folders here. We have the 1.1 and then the 1.6. The 1.6 are the most recent kind of script fixes and things of that nature. And then also the expansion here that I have too, with bass clarinet, contrabassoon, and E-flat clarinet. And over on the multi side, mostly what these are the articulation performer, which is something that we didn't talk about before when we were talking about the different libraries. But basically what the articulation performer is a way to set up key switches and some automation for switching from patch to patch, blending patches together. It's kind of a way to manage all of those, because by default over here in the instruments, you basically, if we just kind of pull up first flutes here, you have a list of patches here. These are all individual patches. So by default, there's no multiple key switched integrated patch. See, we have a double tongue and we have a triple tongue. There's no kind of multi-tongued patch. We have a legato and we have a separate sustained patch. So just something to be aware of. Then we have a folder down here, which includes the runs. And so in this particular folder, we have the octave scale runs. And we have the runs transitions. Loading one of these up, let's check out the first flute legato here. Loads are pretty fast because I batched resaved all of these patches. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that, basically what that does is kind of speed up the loading of these instruments. Otherwise, they will take an extraordinarily long time to load, especially if you're loading up a Kontakt instance with multiple patches in there. So to do that, all you do is go to File, and you go down here to Batch Resave. It'll say yada, yada, yada. This will mess up whatever you have going on over here. And you say, yeah, that's fine. And you navigate to wherever you have your samples installed. You click on the appropriate folder and it will locate the instruments and the samples and kind of link everything together and make everything quick. Now it may ask you, it may come up with some kind of dialog box that says, hey, I don't know where these samples are. Can you point me in the right direction? And then you'll have to kind of navigate to the samples folder. And then it'll find the samples in there and then everything will be cool. And then when you load these up, it will go a lot faster. It really wasn't too long at all. All right, so here we have the first flute legato patch. Kind of play it a little bit so you can hear what this sounds like. Now, I'm actually just going to pump the volume up just a hair here because some of these dynamics are a little bit harder to hear, and so I want you to be able to hear all of this subtlety. So I'm just going to boost it up just a hair. So the legato transitions, all very nice. The dynamic crossfading. Very, very nice. You can hear with some of these, we can actually hear. Key noises, and this is something that we can put in here to taste. I think by default it's around 20, but this kind of randomizes key noise samples. And so we have control over that. And we also have control over release samples. We can turn those on and off. We can turn key noises on and off as well. We can control the volume of the legato transitions to make them at a quite unnatural level, or we can kind of pull those down to something more reasonable. I think the default value sounds really nice. Then we have a volume range. Now what this is kind of an overall kind of dynamic range for this patch. Now, some orchestral sample libraries will normalize all of the samples, which means that the difference between the piano samples and the fortissimo samples or the forte samples is very, very small, maybe 2, 3, 4 decibels. not at all realistic. Now, what they've done here is they've chosen not to do that, but they give you some control over that. So if we crank this all the way up, we are getting the full dynamic range of the instrument. Which is apparently how it was recorded. So you can hear it's very dynamic. That can help bring more realism to these particular instruments. By adjusting this, you can kind of change that. So if we turn it down, we still get some dynamic range, but it's a lot less than this. By default, you can see here, this big old knob in the middle here, this is showing you the actual samples that are being triggered. When this kind of lights up full, you are actually playing back the mezzo forte samples. Pretty cool. And the fortissimo. Or the piano. As you crossfade in between them, you'll see it kind of gets grayed out a little bit, and you can actually see where it's being mixed between the samples. Which is pretty nice to know. It's a handy little feature there. Now also over here we have different vibrato modes. So we were just listening to normal vibrato, but we also have no vibrato. And progressive vibrato. So this starts with no vibrato and then gradually adds it on. It's very, very beautiful. Very nice. Now this is, by default, this is set to MIDI CC22. Now we can also change here. We have the kind of overall volume of the mix position, but we can also load up the close mic position. Now, when you do that, it unloads the mix position because this and the room will go together to create the mix position that would cause some weird kind of phasing. And so to get around that, that just unloads the samples. So you can't use the room with the mix or the close with the mix, but you can use the room with the close or each one by themselves. So here's just the close mic, and I'll turn this up here so you can hear a little bit better. You do hear a tiny bit of reverb trail in there. Just a hair, a little bit of space. We load up the room here, you'll hear some as well. Actually, let me turn down the close. We can mix between these here. We can give a little bit of close and a little bit of room, something like this, right? A little split here. So a lot of flexibility in the tone there. So let's check out a couple of these other samples. Now by default, it loads up the mix position here. And so this is portato long. And this is a polyphonic patch. By default, the shorter patches are set to velocity. You see, we can move the mod wheel here. You can see the little keyboard, but it's not doing anything because it's set to velocity. All we have to do to change that is click on it, and now we have the crossfade just like before. You can see this particular patch is only recorded with 2 dynamic layers. Then we have quartato short. Sforzando. That's just a single dynamic. Shows you right there. Staccato. And we have staccatissimo. They have the players record this with a little extra bite, so these have a nice, strong attack. Really nice. It's got a nice cut to it. And we have sustains. Those other shorts were also polyphonic as well. And double tongue. Now these work very similar to some other libraries where you press the key and then the second tongued articulation fires when you release the key. And they have a setting here for slow and fast. That was slow, and this is fast. Pretty cool there. And then triple tongue works very similar. Except that the third articulation is calculated from the initial down press to the release. So, ba, ba, ba. Down, up, 1, 2, 3. And then we have a fast setting on this too. Then we get on to the trills, and we have a whole collection. We have single trills. And these are just whole tone and half tone single trills. And we have measured trills. Now you can see this patch took a second to load, and that's because there's a lot of samples associated with this patch. The previous one was just a couple of megabytes. This is 600 megabytes. Cool thing about this one is that we can do multiple notes, which is very, very cool. There are 2 basic modes here that we have for these trills. We have end tone equals start tone. So if we play C and then D, we get a trill between C and D, which you can see right here. C, D, C, D, C. If I then play an F after that, now what we get is we get a trill between C and D, and also D and F. So if I play C, E, G, and to play these, you have to play 2 notes, right? Because these are multiple intervals. These are up to a fifth, right? That's a fifth right there, C to G. You have to play the intervals. So the way you do this is you play the first note, that's the start note, and then the second note triggers the trill to play. Now, if you add another note on top of this, the last note that you play becomes the start of the new trill. So the F is going to be the start of the new trill. And you can see that written right here. There's the F to the G. Now, it's set to auto tempo here, but we can uncheck this, and then we can speed this up to, it says triplet X2. So to do more than one note at the same time, you kind of have to roll up the chords. There's another mode here. Playing a third note doesn't do anything until you add another note. So this is start tone equals always new, which means that right now we have a trill between C and D. If we want to do another trill between E and F, we can't, because we have to hit E again. But in this way, now we can get some different things. So I'm going to play C, D, F, G. So see what that looks like there? So now I'm going to switch this back over to end tone equals start tone, and now listen. See, now it's a whole bunch more notes, because now we're getting C to D, E to F, F to G, as opposed to C to D and F to G, which is what this is. So pretty interesting modes there. We also have sforzando trills up to a whole tone and half tone. And we have trills orchestrator trills half tone to a fourth. So these are not measured in tempo, if you will. They're just kind of, you know, they just kind of go at their own pace here, but pretty cool for making really cool textures. And so those same articulations you're going to find on almost all of the other instruments. A few of the other instruments won't have staccatissimo. A few of them won't have runs transitions, which is another one that we should look at really quick too. In the runs here, you can see we have runs transitions. Now these are the playable run patches. And by default, they work with the mod wheel. So we can do these are fast legato transitions. Very, very handy to have. The run transition is available on most of the patches. Then we have octave scale runs. So a lot of different combinations there. You can see we can switch from major to minor. These are all tempo synced, but we can take that out and slow them down, and slow them down way too much. And we can speed them up too. And we can speed them up way too much. And you can stack multiple patches with that. So we can grab, say, for instance, the first clarinet, and we can throw that in here, change our MIDI here to Omni, and It probably would work a lot better if they were doing the same key and the same scale. Octave scale runs in oboe as well. Now for oboe, not all the same scale runs are included because they run out of range. So really, really useful, a lot of fun, and really, really excellent sounding. They blend really well together, they're all synced up, and a really awesome addition to your woodwind arsenal.